Hello, welcome. My name is Dr. Phil Winder, and I'm the CEO of Winder AI. Winder AI is an AI agency that helps businesses build out their AI ambitions. We specialize in reinforcement learning, machine learning, AI, MLOps, all of the good stuff. We work on projects from chatbots to DevOps, anything in between. So if you have any needs or desires to get started in AI or need any help on any of your projects, then please do reach out to me. We'd look forward to hearing from you. So yeah, bit of admin before we get started with today's presentation. As usual, if you would like to ask a question, then the best way of doing that is to post a comment in the chat window of the platform that you're using. So if you're on YouTube, then just use the comments. If you're on LinkedIn, then use the comments on there. And I'll get to them at the end. There is a delay, so make sure that you do post them as soon as you have them, because the feed is delayed in some of the platforms. Anything else? Yep, no, that's it. Let's crack on. So today's presentation is all about the EU AI Act again. If you are a follower of my videos, you might have already seen one about the EU AI Act. Well, the big news is that it has been signed into law. So this presentation is a slightly updated version explaining what the EU AI Act is, but more crucially provides you with some of the details about the timelines and the specific things that you need to start thinking about, because that information wasn't available previously. So let's give you a bit of a recap first on what the EU AI Act is, if you haven't already come across it. It is a piece of legislation, a piece of regulation that has come out of the European Union. It has now been signed into law, and it will come into effect in the future. The idea behind it is that it places new burdens on the developers and the providers and the deployers and the producers and everyone within the supply chain of AI when the end user or customer is in the EU. Okay, so it doesn't matter if you are based in the US or based in the UK or anywhere in the world. If you have an end user that is based in Europe, then you will fall under this regulation. The idea behind the legislation, I keep saying legislation, it's not legislation, regulation. The idea behind the regulation is that it is supposed to provide some guidelines and best practices to make sure that your AI solutions are safe and do not cause harm. The way in which they're attempting to implement that, though, is a little bit more tricky. A lot of the ideas behind it are just best practices. We'll talk a little bit about them later, so that's all good. But there are still quite a few questions over the actual implementation of the regulation, and even things that we don't even know how it works yet. Okay, So the most important piece of information that you need to know is the timeline. So as I said, it was signed into law in August. So the timeline starts now. I'm just going to pause it actually because I've got a very shouty dog outside. 2 seconds. All right, there we go. Close the window. Starting again, the timeline. The timeline is the most important piece of information that you need to know. The EU AI Act was signed in August 2024, and we have a number of different timelines depending on how you are impacted. So just to give you a recap of how they are classifying the risks involved. So most of the risks have been defined as application-specific risks. So there's a list of applications which fall into one of a few categories. The first is prohibited. That means it's effectively illegal to have an application that falls into that list. The second is high risk, which is an application that could potentially cause harm, but should be okay as long as you de-risk it effectively. And then there's everything else. Okay, so they're the 3 categories that you need to know. From February 2025, all prohibited applications will be prohibited. That is the date at which they will become prohibited. So you need to double check to see whether your application, your use case is on that list of prohibited use cases. And if yes, then yeah, act now. You don't have long. Everything else except high risk begins to fall under the regulation from August 2026, so 2 years from now. So that includes the vast majority of AI use cases, because I mean, if we think about all applications of AI, the vast majority of them don't fall under this regulation. So everything else will have to comply with the regulation from August 2026. So this includes things like you must have messages on the output, the generated output. If you're generating anything from any of your models, then you must have an indication that it is generated by something artificial. Also, it needs to have an API to signify that it is artificially generated, and other markers like that. The sort of transparency obligations. There's also regulatory obligations where you register with some EU body as well. Not too many obligations, but a few for everybody. The next one is high risk. That comes into force in August 2027. So that's a year after that. That's 3 years from now. So all applications that fall under, I keep saying applications, stop saying applications. All use cases that fall under the high risk category will need to comply with the high risk regulation by August 2027. So this is quite burdensome. If you do fall under that, then you've got quite a lot of work to do. There's some really interesting corner cases and issues with the current regulation that people are just going to have to figure out as time goes on. Yeah, I'll talk more a little bit about that at the end. And then finally, we have a little bit of a rather flexible part of the legislation that states that everything that exists before August 2026 must be brought into line by January 2031. So in 7 years' time, six or 7 years' time, any application that currently exists now or before August 2026 must be brought in line. If you build your application and finish it before August 2026 and it doesn't fall into prohibited or high risk, then you are okay not to change much until January 2031. Okay, so they're the key dates, and obviously there's a lot of detail behind all of those dates, depending on the the classification and things like that. I'll give you a link to the full blog post that this is based upon at the end, and you can look into the details to learn more about that. So now I just wanted to point out the how the timeline is affected by the risk classification of your AI system. So to recap, prohibited applications consist of, or the list of prohibited applications, prohibited use cases are those that cause harm or target vulnerable people, unjustifiable detrimental treatment. So those first three are basically like do no harm. I would suspect that 99.99% of the people listening go out with the intention of doing no harm. So if you fall into those prohibited applications, then you probably shouldn't be doing them in the first instance. However, there are a couple of real use cases listed at the bottom of this. The first one is inferring emotions in the workplace or in education, and biometric-based categorization of individuals. Those two use cases are now prohibited, and I know that they exist. So so that's going to be interesting to see how that list changes and what people do about it with regards to those specific use cases. So those things need to happen by February 2025. So high risk applications, and this is a much bigger bucket of models and applications and use cases. High risk applications, just to recap, are anything involved in safety of individuals, anything to do with systems that aren't categorization. So something like identification, if you're a airport identification company, something like that. Any critical infrastructure, essential services, so anything to do with electricity, energy, water, things like that. You have to just double check the definition of critical infrastructure there, because it's important. Education, that could bring a whole swathe of use cases into the high risk category. And employment, similarly, if you're using AI in any part of your employment pipeline, then again that will fall under the high risk category. Justice, being used in the judiciary or elections, and then finally the big one, all Gen AI models. And well, I say no, that was the wrong word. Why did I use the word all there? Gen AI models, but they have a very specific definition of which Gen AI models are going to be included. It's the ones that present a systematic risk because of their widespread use or widespread capability to other use cases and things like that. What they're trying to do here is they're trying to capture all of the big Gen AI model developers, from around the world, but predominantly the US, and to bring them to the table. I'm sure they'll be able to cope with that. But if there's smaller companies that are working on Gen AI models, then this could be quite burdensome, because not only are they high risk, there's also quite a lot of documentation and other things that you need to do in order to comply with the regulation here. All of that needs to fall into place by August 2027. All other applications, August 2026, already mentioned that. So let's talk about those key obligations now. So what do I mean by all applications? So everyone who has an AI system that is exposed to a user in the EU needs to register in the EU database, which doesn't currently exist. They need to ensure that the users are aware that they are using AI. And finally, if you are generating content, it must be digitally marked as such. The high-risk vendors must produce evidence of all of the below. I won't go through each one. When I mentioned at the start that a lot of the regulation includes best practices, and here we're talking about documentation, evaluation and testing, logging and monitoring, AI governance. All of this should exist, and I think that this is just a nudge towards companies to make them put more emphasis on these best practices, because quite often there's a push to getting things to market at the expense of some of these things. So this places a greater burden on businesses to provide it. Gen AI vendors in particular must produce evidence of an adjudication of this systemic risk by the EU. So that's the job of the EU assessors. They will inform you whether it represents a systemic risk, and lots more documentation and disclosure. The interesting thing here is that the regulation provides the right to the authorities to give access to all of your code, all of your data, all of your documentation, everything. Okay, so there's quite a big burden there. There's also burdens on third parties that are redistributing or distributing AI systems. They have to verify that the model is CE marked, to denote that they have conformed to the regulation, and also is accompanied by a copy of the declaration. There's an example declaration in the Act. So this is going to be interesting for the big marketplaces like on Hugging Face and things like that. They're going to have to start automating, I guess. They're going to have to start doing this in order to serve their EU customers. There's a few exceptions in the regulation that's important to note. The first one is there's a big exception for all open source for Gen AI. And again, that depends on the definition of systemic risk, so it's still not entirely clear. But in general, all open source work is exempt from these burdens. Also, there's a bit of I have a bit of confusion at the moment about the definition of making available on the market, which is the wording that they use to denote when a user interacts with an AI system. In the document, it defines it as a supply of, in the course of a commercial activity, whether in return for payment or free of charge. Commercial activity, does that mean like the sale, or does that imply that there's a customer involved? And if yes, I think that opens the door to have an exception for internal use only, maybe even development use only. But we'll have to wait and see how the regulatory advisors and bodies clarify that statement. So what do we need to do to start preparing businesses? Well, the first thing we need to do is to start engaging experts now. We are partnering with a legal firm called Everard and Shepherd, and we are planning on going to market with a service that provides both the legal expertise and the technical expertise to implement the AI governance strategies required to fulfill many of these obligations. If you're interested in that service, then I would love to speak to you, because we're just starting to ramp it up now. If you have a technical team that's interested on being proactive on these issues, then analyze the key technical deficiencies that you already have. It's probably already quite obvious what you need, because most of these, like I said, are best practices. So your MLOps team, your MLOps experts will probably be able to tell you what's lacking. Implement those deficiencies that relate to the EU AI Act as soon as possible. Depending on your risk classification, you don't have too long. And I think probably one of the key new pieces of procedural infrastructure is the creation of risk management systems and repositories to capture and organize all of this evidence. As I said, the actual declaration process, or the evidence process, is not entirely settled yet. That will be delivered in about 6 months to a year's time. So for now, just make sure you know where everything is, and so it's ready to copy paste into that that document when it's ready. And then finally, also consider the future. Like, what AI models are you looking to develop in the future? Do you think that your business will move into any of these high risk or prohibited areas? Does that change your strategic priorities? Do you want to delay those efforts? Do you want to speed up those efforts so you can take advantage of this deploy before August 2026 deadline, so you can leave it until January 2031? So lots of kind of strategic decisions to be made as well. All right, so that's the main updates that I wanted to present. The main ones were the timelines. The fines haven't changed. It's still up to 35 million euros, or 7% of global turnover. That's the highest fine for prohibited, for the use of prohibited applications. Many AI applications fall under the high risk category, and they also have placeholders in the regulation to allow them to add more or even remove them. So you do need to keep track of that over time. You should probably start considering to implement many of the MLOps best practices now before these dates, because they're useful anyway from an engineering standpoint, a robustness standpoint. And then finally that key date of August 2026, that really the majority of the regulation starts to be enforced. There's obviously going to be new information coming out before then. There's still lots of things about like regulatory sandboxes, which are completely unknown, example declarations and evidence formats and things like that. How people are going to assess these, the assessment bodies haven't been created yet. They apparently need to be delegated to individual countries. It's not the EU as a whole that's doing it. So that might affect what happens there. You'll also need an EU presence. You need an EU representative, they call it, in order to be a person that the EU can contact, and it has to be somebody based within the EU. So that's also interesting for smaller companies that are based elsewhere. But either way, if you want to learn more about the details here, because I went over the key dates quite quickly and the classifications quite quickly. I've done an in-depth analysis on the EU AI Act from a technical standpoint, and I've placed it on the website already. You can view that at winder.ai/AI Act signed. The QR code links to that page. That will provide you with links from my interpretation back to the original source act. And I probably should have mentioned at the start that I'm not a lawyer. I'm an AI engineer. I'm a AI, somebody who works in AI. I'm not a lawyer. So if you do have any concerns about the wording or the risks involved, then I definitely do recommend that you get in touch with your legal team or lawyer. If you're interested in looking at any of our services that allow us to work with these legal frameworks in AI, then definitely reach out to us as well. Okay, we've got some contact details there. Just before I hand it over to questions, well, start typing your questions now, so they come in before I drop off. But I just wanted to note two things. So we've got a couple more events coming up, but there's two that I've not even managed to get listed on the website yet. The first one is we've got an exciting announcement about one of our products. So I'm going to do something dedicated just for that. We're going to have to wait a few more days before I can do that. Secondly, I've just interviewed a person that was involved in the writing of the EU AI Act, and he had some really fascinating insights into the creation and the debates that were going on within Brussels with regards to the Act and the position that they finally found themselves in. He also provides a little bit of insight on what the key risks are from a risk perspective as well. So I've done that interview, I've recorded it. I just need to edit it and then generate a new event for that. So hopefully I should get to release that within the next few weeks. But yeah, you can watch the Winda.ai events page, so Winda.ai/events, or you can sign up to our newsletter and we'll talk about it there. Yeah, okay, let's have a look at the comments. I think we've got a couple. All right, can you give examples of biocategorization, Stephen Morris? Thank you very much. Yeah, good question. So firstly, the AI Act doesn't spell out any specific use cases. They're very general at the moment. They say biometric classification. So you kind of so I guess the answer is no. I can't provide any examples because the Act doesn't provide any examples. Based upon my discussions with other people, the EU want to start curating a more detailed list of use cases to give you examples of what falls under that big headline of biometric classification. You can certainly read more about it on the blog post, but also in the Act itself. But I don't think you'll get the answer you want. I don't think that they're ever going to completely spell it out for people, because that just creates, loopholes for people to get around. My interpretation of the text is that it means in any application where you are intentionally trying to categorize natural persons into groups. And the reason why that's bad is because that naturally leads to biases involved with people. Whether it be socioeconomic, racial, sex, all of these things, it's quite easy to accidentally train a model to pick up on some feature, say their income or something like that, which directly correlates to their race or something like that. And then it becomes inherently biased and unlawful under other laws. For example, if you're a financial services firm, there's already laws that prevent that kind of thing from happening. So that's my interpretation of it. But I think one of the things that I was talking about with this this chap that I had an interview with was what happens when we don't know whether it's an edge case or not. And he was saying, well, the idea behind it was that you work with the regulator, you work in the regulatory sandbox to figure out whether it is okay or not okay. And they would make a determination on whether it falls under this or not. So I think there's going to be some work from the regulator and from companies working together to figure out what is and what isn't okay. Because, yeah, you're right, it's not exactly crystal at the moment. Good question, though. Thank you. Another question about funding, but I don't really understand it. There's something about a Security Council or something, but sorry, assignment UOT, if that's a genuine question, could you rewrite it, because I don't really understand the question. All right, just have a quick chat, quick drink. Just a few more minutes for any more questions. If you've got any more questions that you have after this, then, or if you're watching a replay, a recording of this, then yeah, I'd love to hear from you. Just email phil@winda.ai or LinkedIn or wherever you are, and I'll get back to you. Okay, no more questions. I think that's enough time. I think that's enough time for the feed delay to roll around. So I'll call it there. Thank you so much for joining me today. I hope you've enjoyed it. If you've got any more questions about the EU AI Act, then check out the blog post. There's a lot more information in there. If there's anything not contained within that blog post, then please email me, ask me. I'd love to either add it to the blog post or to just answer your questions directly. If you're interested in any of our AI services, or more specifically in this case, the service that we're looking to provide that bundles both legal and technical advice into one package, then also please do reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you if you're interested in that. Couple more events coming up very soon, so please keep an eye on the events page or on LinkedIn. I'll post them out there, and I think that's about it. I'll leave it there. Thanks a lot. I'll see you next time. Thanks. Bye-bye.